Let's start at the beginning. What is the origin story of Wikipedia?
The origin story of Wikipedia. Well, so I was watching the growth of the free software movement, open source software, and seeing programmers coming together to collaborate in new ways, sharing code, doing that under free license, which is really interesting because it empowers an ability to work together. That's really hard to do if the code is still proprietary, because then if I chip in and help, we sort of have to figure out how I'm going to be rewarded and what that is. But the idea that everyone can copy it and it just is part of the commons really empowered a huge wave of creative software production. And I realized that that kind of collaboration could extend beyond just software to all kinds of cultural works. And the first thing that I thought of was an encyclopedia. I thought, oh, that seems obvious that an encyclopedia, you can collaborate on it. There's a few reasons why. One, we all pretty much know what an encyclopedia entry on, say, the Eiffel Tower should be like. You should see a picture, a few pictures maybe, history, location, something about the architect, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a shared understanding of what it is we're trying to do, and then we can collaborate, and different people can chip in and find sources and so on and so forth. So set up first Nupedia, which was about 2 years before Wikipedia. And with Nupedia, we had this idea that in order to be respected, we had to be even more academic than a traditional encyclopedia, because a bunch of volunteers on the internet getting together to write an encyclopedia, you could be made fun of if it's just every random person. So we implemented this 7-stage review process to get anything published, and two things came of that. So one of the earliest entries that we published after this rigorous process, a few days later, we had to pull it because as soon as it hit the web and the broader community took a look at it, people noticed plagiarism and realized that it wasn't actually that good, even though it had been reviewed by academics and so on. So we had to pull it. So it's like, oh, okay, well, so much for a 7-stage review process. But also, I decided that I wanted to try. I was frustrated. Why is this taking so long? Why is it so hard? So I thought, oh, okay. I saw that Robert Merton had won a Nobel Prize in economics for his work on option pricing theory. And when I was in academia, that's what I worked on, was option pricing theory. I had a published paper. So I'd worked through all of his academic papers, and I knew his work quite well. I thought, oh, I'll write a short biography of Merton. And when I started to do it, I'd been out of academia, had been a grad student for a few years then. I felt this huge intimidation because they were going to take my draft and send it to the most prestigious finance professors that we could find to give me feedback for revisions. And it felt like being back in grad school. It's like this really oppressive sort of like, you're going to submit it for review and you're going to get critiques.
A little bit at the bad part of grad.
Yeah, the bad part of grad school, right? And so I was like, oh, this isn't intellectually fun. This is like the bad part of grad school.
Yeah.
It's intimidating, and there's a lot of, potential embarrassment if I screw something up and so forth. And so that was when I realized, okay, look, this is never going to work. This is not something that people are really going to want to do. So Jeremy Rosenfeld, one of my employees, had brought and showed me the wiki concept in December. And then Larry Sanger brought in the same, said, hey, what about this wiki idea? And so in January, we decided to launch Wikipedia, but we weren't sure. So the original project was called Nupedia. And even though it wasn't successful, we did have quite a group of academics and like really serious people. And we were concerned that, oh, maybe these academics are going to really hate this idea, and we shouldn't just convert the project immediately. We should launch this as a side project, the idea of, oh, here's a wiki where we can start playing around. But actually, we got more work done in 2 weeks than we had in almost 2 years because people were able to just jump on and start doing stuff. And it was actually a very exciting time. Back then you could be the first person who typed Africa is a continent and hit save, which isn't much of an encyclopedia entry, but it's true, and it's a start, and it's kind of fun. Like, you put your name down. Actually, a funny story was several years later, I just happened to be online, and I saw when, I think his name is Robert Allman, won the Nobel Prize in economics. And we didn't have an entry on him at all, which was surprising, but it wasn't that surprising. This was still early days, And so I got to be the first person to type Robert Altman won a Nobel Prize in economics, and hit save, which again wasn't a very good article. But then I came back 2 days later and people had improved it and so forth. So that second half of the experience, where with Robert Merton, I never succeeded because it was just too intimidating. It was like, oh no, I was able to chip in and help. Other people jumped in. Everybody was interested in the topic because it's all in the news at the moment. And so it's just a completely different model, which worked much, much better.
Well, what is it that made that so accessible, so fun, so natural to just add something?
Well, I think it's, especially in the early days, and this, by the way, has gotten much harder because there are fewer topics that are just greenfield, available. But, you could say, oh, well, I know a little bit about this and I can get it started. But then it is fun to come back then and see other people have added and improved and so on and so forth. And that idea of collaborating, where people can, much like open source software, you put your code out and then people suggest revisions and they change it and it modifies and it grows beyond the original creator. It's just a kind of a fun, wonderful, quite geeky hobby, but people enjoy it.
How much debate was there over the interface, over the details of how to make that seamless and frictionless?
Yeah, I mean, not as much as there probably should have been in a way. During that 2 years of the failure of Nupedia, where very little work got done, what was actually productive was there was a huge, long discussion, email discussion, very clever people talking about things like neutrality, talking about what is an encyclopedia, but also talking about more technical ideas, things back then XML was kind of all the rage, and thinking about, could we, shouldn't you have certain data that might be in multiple articles that gets updated automatically? So for example, the population of New York City, every 10 years, there's a new official census. Couldn't you just update that bit of data in one place and it would update across all languages? That is a reality today, but back then it was just like, how do we do that? How do we think about that?
So that is a reality today where it's there's some
so Wikidata,
universal variables, Wikidata.
Yeah, Wikidata. You can link from a Wikipedia entry, you can link to that piece of data in Wikidata. I mean, it's a pretty advanced thing, but there are advanced users who are doing that. And then when that gets updated, it updates in all the languages where you've done that.
I mean, that's really interesting. There was this chain of emails in the early days of discussing the details of what is. So there's the interface, there's the...
Yeah, so the interface. So an example, there was some software called UseModWiki, which we started with. It's quite amusing, actually, because the main reason we launched with UseModWiki is that it was a single Perl script. So it was really easy for me to install it on the server and just get running. But it was, some guy's hobby project. It was cool, but it was just a hobby project. And all the data was stored in flat text files. So there was no real database behind it. So to search the site, you basically used grep, which is just like basic Unix utility to like look through all the files. So that clearly was never going to scale. But also in the early days, it didn't have real logins. So you could set your username, but there were no passwords. So, I might say Bob Smith, and then someone else comes along and says, no, I'm Bob Smith. And they're both editing. Now that never really happened. We didn't have a problem with it, but it was kind of obvious. Like you can't grow a big website where everybody can pretend to be everybody. That's not going to be good for trust and reputation and so forth. So quickly I had to write a little, login, store people's passwords and things like that. So you could have unique identities. And then another example of something, quite, you would have never thought would have been a good idea. And it turned out to not be a problem, but to make a link in Wikipedia, in the early days, you would make a link to a page that may or may not exist by just using camel case, meaning it's like uppercase, lowercase, and you smash the words together. So maybe New York City, you might type NEW, no space, capital Y, York City. And that would make a link, but that was ugly. That was clearly not right. And so I was like, okay, well, that's just not going to look nice. Let's just use square brackets. 2 square brackets makes a link. And that may have been an option in the software. I'm not sure I thought up square brackets. But anyway, we just did that, which worked really well. It makes nice links. And, you can see, and it's red links or blue links, depending on if the page exists or not. But the thing that it didn't occur to me even think about is that, for example, on the German language standard keyboard, there is no square bracket. So for German Wikipedia to succeed, people had to learn to do some alt codes to get the square bracket, or a lot of users cut and paste a square bracket where they could find one. They would just cut and paste one in. And yet German Wikipedia has been a massive success. So somehow that didn't slow people down.
How is that the German keyboards don't have a square bracket? How do you do programming? How do you live life to its fullest without square bracket?
It's a very good question. I'm not really sure. I mean, maybe it does now because keyboard standards have, drifted over time and becomes useful to have a certain character. I mean, it's the same thing. Like there's not really a W character in Italian. Yeah. And it wasn't on keyboards, or I think it is now, but in general, W is not a letter in Italian language, but it appears in enough international words that it's crept into Italian. So,
and all of these things are probably Wikipedia articles in themselves.
Oh yeah.
The discussion of square brackets.
Whole discussion, I'm sure.
On both the English and the German Wikipedia. And the difference between those two might be very interesting.